Top 8 Disturbing Villains from Hack and Slash comic series. Hack and Slash is a comic book series centered on Cassie Hack, written by Tim Seeley and initially published by Devil's Due Publishing before their merger with First Comics and before finding its present home at Image Comics. Cassie Hack is a young woman who has dedicated her life to the avenging of slashers, a term affectionately applied to the villains of horror films such as Friday the 13th and Child's Play. After learning that her own mother, who worked as a lunch lady at her school, butchered her classmates as a result of their relentless bullying directed at Cassie. Cassie had immediately dialed 911 after seeing her mother's most recent murder spree. She was able to save the life of her mother's final victim, but she was forced to witness her mother's suicide. Cassie went to a new school after being placed in a foster home. She despised her fanatically religious foster parents, but she persevered because she desperately wanted to be accepted. Cassie began training in a variety of martial arts and fighting tactics, and she became determined to track down the slashers and put an end to their killing sprees wherever she could. She and her acquired sidekick called Vlad embarked on multiple adventures and met various villains. Those who love the comfort of sitting at home while watching Jason Voorhees slaughter some unprepared campers for the umpteenth time will feel perfectly at home while reading this book, which is filled to the brim with everything one would expect from a slasher movie. However, today, we will take a look at the 8 most disturbing villains from the Hack and Slash comic series. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Acid Angel. To understand this villain, you have to know what turned her into Acid Angel. Angela Cicero was a party girl from the city. She had it all, the looks, the money, and the demeanor. Every night of the week, there was a new club to visit, and every morning, there was a new man to leave behind. Angela, however, had a longtime friend, Michelle, who was married and whom she'd known since infancy. Despite Michelle's faith in her, Angela and Michelle's husband got involved in a tumultuous romantic relationship, and Michelle was so distraught when she found out that she committed suicide by cutting her wrist in the bathtub. Michelle's husband, filled with remorse and resentment, substituted hydrochloric acid for Angela's insulin and murdered her, or so he thought. She rose from the dead, determined to continue her life and punish men for turning her into the Acid Angel. She was a true femme fatale, and would use her looks and charm to lure men and kill them using an acid bath, leaving nothing behind. When her killing started to get noticed, Cassie and Vlad hired a man to act as bait for Angela, and they were able to stop her before she could put him in an acid bath. Their bait, however, turned out to be employed by Cutotech, a cosmetics company. The corporation was capturing slashers in order to develop an anti-aging solution. Cassie and Vlad were offered a job capturing slashers, but it all came to an end when Ashley Guthrie released Angela and several other slashers, and Cassie and Vlad were on the run. She is killed in this story arc, but is a tough one to keep down as she is resurrected again and again because her skills are useful to anyone who wants someone killed. Father Wrath. Father Wrath began his career as a preacher in Tennessee. He was a zealot, a bigot, and a homophobe, and no one knew if he was even a priest. Despite his outlandish nature, he was a covert cross-dresser who was drawn to guys. In fact, he lived his life by a single mission, and that was to punish all sinners, which he did using his own barbaric methods, making himself the dispenser of justice. He was immune to pain and harm, and his weapons of choice is a gigantic cross. Initially, he was preparing Samuel Lawrence, a young man, to be his disciple and successor. However, he made sexual attempts towards Samuel. He then got struck in the head with a wooden crucifix. Father Wrath died as a result of his injuries. He stayed dead until Laura Locks, an angry schoolgirl, resurrected him. Laura possessed a book of spells that enabled her to entirely dominate Father Wrath. The two went to a spring break beach party in Florida where they planned to murder the students. Cassie Hack, on the other hand, put an end to Father Wrath, while Laura Locks was severely burned. Cassie and Vlad will later meet a new Father Wrath who turned out to be Samuel Lawrence in the town of Haverhill, Missouri. Vlad discovers that the first Father Wrath was Samuel's uncle. After Father Wrath tried to seduce Samuel, Samuel killed him. Samuel became disillusioned for a period, abandoning his Christian views and engaging in sinful behavior. But it didn't take him long to realize that, while what his uncle sought to do to him was wrong, what he did to sinners was good. As a result, Samuel adopted the moniker Father Wrath and began his crusade against sin. Lunch Lady. The Lunch Lady is none other than Cassie Hack's mother herself, a terrifying serial killer in her own right. In an interview, Delilah Cordero would meet her future husband, Jack Hack. It may have been a standard psychiatric test to her, however, it was more of a psychoanalysis test. Dr. White and Jack Hack have been engaged to investigate slashers and possible slashers. Due to her aggressive and frequently violent conduct as a child, Delilah had been labeled as a possible slasher. Cassie was born as a result of her pregnancy. She and Jack fled to start a new life together. However, the government would soon find them, so Jack fled to lead the government away from them in order to protect his wife and child. Delilah grew too protective of Cassie as a result. Cassie became the target of relentless bullying from her classmates throughout her childhood. Delilah eventually took matters into her own hands and mercilessly killed the children who had tormented her daughter. She disposed of the dead by adding a fresh mystery meat to the lunch menu after that, becoming a slasher that the government thought she would eventually turn into. When Delilah refuses to listen to her daughter's plea, Cassie reveals she called the cops and turned her mother in. Delilah committed suicide by stuffing her head into a pot of boiling gravy in front of her entire family, including Cassie. The Lunch Lady's action effectively made Cassie aware of who she was, as it was this incident that propelled her to finding and stopping slashers from causing harm. The Lunch Lady was loving and caring towards her daughter, but she was a product of her nature and surroundings, which made her twisted. She was later resurrected and used against Cassie, which really emotionally broke her. But she also managed to tell her daughter what she truly felt and console her before she died for the final time. The Mosaic Man. Julian Gallo, also known as the Mosaic Man, was a Chicago-based slasher who was Cassie and Vlad's first encounter. Julian Gallo was born in Chicago and grew up with an abusive father who beat him often, causing him to grow up angry and resentful. The history of this twisted villain is rather important because abuse and hardship turned him into the barbaric killer referred to as the Mosaic Man. Julian then began working as a low-rent hitman for the local mob as soon as he was able to break away from his father and go off on his own. Having a messed up relationship with violence, he thought that murders were works of art. This stretched as far as his own face because he thought that it should match the beauty of his art. So he remade his face into a mosaic of his victim's flesh. Julian, however, eventually went afoul of his own group and was slain. The twisted don't rest for long, and he soon ended up resurrecting as a slasher, killing his former boss and fashioning a weapon out of his bones. Julian then proceeded to execute the mob family's remaining members. People in Chicago began to believe it was the Meat Man who was killing people because of local folklore regarding Vlad as the Meat Man. Cassie Hack came to Chicago to kill the Meat Man based on these tales, but she ended up fighting Vlad instead, until she understood that even if he was the Meat Man, he wasn't the slasher she was looking for. Vlad and Cassie then teamed up to track down Julian, the true slasher, and hurl him under a subway train to put a stop to his rule as a twisted and barbaric slasher that ruled the streets and found beauty in murder. Ashley Guthrie. Ashley Guthrie was Evan and Susan Guthrie's son and Lucas Guthrie's sibling. The Guthries lived in Mount Healthy, Ohio, and were regarded as proof that the American dream could be realized. Mr. Guthrie was an attorney and Mrs. Guthrie was a bookkeeper. For the Guthrie family, everything seemed to be in order and enjoyable. Ashley, on the other hand, was a strange kid. Some say he was born with a bad disposition. Ashley was incredibly possessive of his possessions, to the point where other children were forbidden from playing with him because they would always return home crying. Ashley is accused of killing his cat's kittens because they were preventing him from playing with his pet. With such a difficult child, the Guthrie's marriage began to fall apart and the two Guthrie children died as a result. The truth behind the murders was as follows. Lucas took Ashley's toy truck away after he refused to share it with his brother. Ashley was so furious that he took the truck back and slammed it into Lucas's head, then went upstairs to nap. Suzanne hurried following, distraught about what her wicked kid had done, and smothered Ashley with his teddy bear. Ashley, on the other hand, had not died. His spirit continued to haunt his parents' nightmares until Mr. Guthrie was driven to death and Suzanne was institutionalized. Since his death took place while he was asleep, Ashley had turned into a sleep slasher. Ashley began appearing in other children's dreams, murdering them while they slept with their favorite toy. This is where Cassie gets involved as she aims to solve the murders and went into the dream realm to stop Ashley. She was successful in killing him, or so she believed. Ashley was able to re-enter life in the teddy bear he had been suffocated with by unexplained techniques, a terrifying villain indeed. He was also thought to be born evil. Bobby Brunswick. Bobby Brunswick was a straightforward individual from Eminence, Indiana. He got a job at the Elston Animal Shelter as an assistant to Dr. Usa Elston. One of his responsibilities included burying the deceased animals that Usa was compelled to put down. Usa developed a strong bond with Bobby, which enraged Kyle, her nurse husband. Kyle was irritated that Bobby could provide her with something he couldn't. Bobby was mocked by Kyle and another nurse named Todd, who referred to him as a retard. They trapped Bobby inside the euthanasia room and pretended to turn on the gas as a joke one day. Unfortunately, the gas did turn on, and Bobby died as a result. Kyle and the town sheriff Donovan worked feverishly to bury Bobby outside at the same spot where Bobby would bury the deceased animals. Bobby, like all of the animals he had buried, sprang from the soil as a slasher. He led the zombie animals in a Pied Piper-like journey to destroy those responsible for his demise, armed with a shovel. Todd, a sheriff's deputy, and a woman called Dana were among those attacked by the animals. Due to the animal attack, Bobby entered the Eminence Sheriff Station, which was in shambles. He killed Sheriff Donovan by raising his shovel. Bobby Brunswick had the ability to command zombie animals as a slasher. He dispatched them to assassinate those he held responsible for his death and burial. As a weapon, Bobby wielded a shovel. When he was alive, he used the same shovel to bury dead animals. He is another example of a man turned into a twisted villain due to the unkindness of others and facing constant hardships and traumatic events. He was a terrifying undead villain, and his abilities made Dr. Gross. Dr. Gross was a serial killer who operated in Atlanta, Georgia. Gross specialized in torturing his victims both physically and psychologically. Despite the fact that he was completely devoid of skin, which he claimed he removed himself, Gross, a former psychologist, had his career devastated when several of his students reported him after he admitted to doing gross things to them. Gross adopted an abandoned construction site as his hideout and sought revenge on the students who damaged him. Slowly tortured them to death while psychoanalysing them, making it unclear if he is officially alive or not. What made him extremely dangerous and terrifying was not only the fact that he was a sight that one would not possibly ever forget, but also his in-depth knowledge of medicine and surgery, which made him a pro at the use of medical equipment, especially surgery knives and tools. Cassie took on the case to find him and stop his activities when his string of killings and tortures came to light. In the process, she wore a tracking device so Vlad could find her, and with this, she allowed herself to be abducted by Gross, who tortured her by tying her to a chair in his hideout and cutting off 2 of her toes with a mechanical saw. Gross tortured Cassie by making her experience childhood memories such as being bullied, her mother's suicide, meeting Vlad, and the day her father departed. Gross appears bored after diagnosing Cassie with antisocial personality disorder and pointing out her troubles with her father, and is about to slit her throat when Vlad leaps through the window behind him and cuts one of Gross's arms off. They overpower Dr. Gross and push him out of the window, marking the end of the gross malpractice perpetuated by Gross. Grin Face. Grin Face is one of the most twisted killers, and his backstory is extremely important to understand how he became a notorious slasher. Matthew Ravenswood was the bad boy, older neighborhood child, the type of terrible influence that every parent fears, and his girlfriend Sarah Bunn adored him for it. During the summer, Sarah and Matthew would sneak out every night and destroy mailboxes, play ding-dong ditch, and then paw and dry hump until the sun came up. Sarah, on the other hand, usually intervened before Matthew went too far. Matthew was taunting Sarah with a local story in Manchester, Iowa about a strict farmer and his beautiful daughter, Jenny Fig, growing enamored with her. Sarah was enraged that Matthew would go on a search to have a glimpse at another female, but she couldn't stop him, even when he dragged her to the farm wearing a mask. When they reached Jenny Fig, they discovered that the stories were false and that Jenny had become a vegetable as a result of a horse kick to the head. The farmer tracked down Matthew and Sarah and imprisoned them in his storage shack where he used to rent out arcade games. One of the games turned on after what felt like an eternity of waiting for Matthew and Sarah. Matthew have heard of Bloodbust, a forbidden game in which you played as Grin Face, a maniac with a hammer pursuing kids around the graveyard, smashing as many as you could before they got to the bus. While Sarah sat terrified for her life listening to Matthew play for what seemed like an eternity, Matthew played for hours and hours. Sarah believed it was Matthew's fault she loved him and that she was there because of him. He was the one who set out to make her envious by pursuing an urban legend. Sarah ultimately snapped and killed Matthew by repeatedly pounding his face against the arcade screen. When the farmer recovered his corpse, He returned to let the two go, but the harm had already been done and Matthew's body was buried in a cornfield by Sarah and the farmer. However, Matthew reappeared from the tomb wearing a crowskin mask. It turns out that Matthew had assassinated the farmer and his daughter and transformed the cornfield into a maze of barbed wire and hand nails. He persuaded Sarah to bring him victims, children to chase and murder in the manner of Grin Face and Bloodbust. Matthew had died and resurrected, believing he was still in a computer game, turning into a slasher. With this, we come to the end of today's video. Are there any twisted and deranged slashers from Hack and Slash who can hold a candle to the ones on our list? Tell us in the comments below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.